Today, I want to dive into the question of what is jazz? Some people talk about jazz as being a beat, like, oh, that's jazzy beat. Or some people hear it as harmony, like, oh, those are jazzy chords. Or maybe it's rhythm, certain syncopations. Maybe it's music that sounds like the swing era. All of that could be jazz. But what does it mean to be jazz, and does it matter? I personally think there's a couple different ways that this word can be used. What do I mean by that? Well, I think that jazz is really more of an attitude. It's more of a how than a what. It's the attitude that you bring to the music. It's the attitude with which you approach the concept of the music, how it's performed, how it's shared, how it's talked about, the culture around it, what's important to it. So it does often have swing. It does often have blues. Does not having those things disqualify it from being jazz? I don't know. Sometimes, but sometimes not, in my opinion. I think that it's more about that seeking for a personal opinion about a piece of music, about a set of chord changes, about harmony. If it's creative together, that's kind of in the spirit of jazz. There are some things that I think kind of go too far away from the swing and the blues, like there's a lot of improvised creative music and there's a lot of improvised cinematic electronic music. Jazz is an intention where you have learned through a lineage, learning repertoire and language through the masters of the music. If you've done that and then go in a new direction, I think it's still jazz because you're approaching it through the lens of a jazz musician, meaning someone who values improvisation and mastery of their instrument and transcending that mastery into group dynamic and group interaction, creating something more than the sum of its parts. Of course, that means you're going to absorb blues and swing through learning from the masters. It comes out in their expression, but that's what it's about to me, is expression, creativity, and working together to create this music. And it can mean a lot of things. I don't think jazz is just a four-letter word that means one thing. I think it can be jazz in quotation marks, something that represents something else. I think jazz can mean nostalgia. I think jazz can mean it's reminiscent of an era. It can mean a number of things, but just playing a Tin Pan Alley song automatically, to me, doesn't make it jazz in the way that I think about it when I think about the heroes of this music, when I think about Art Blakey, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong. They were playing music of their time in a way that expressed their individuality and the way that they wanted to improvise, how they heard the music, using the music of the day. And of course, that's gone through the whole history of the music with different players and different approaches. So that's what I think jazz is. Jazz is an attitude. It's not a what, it's a how. It's an approach. Wayne Shorter's definition is a good one. I heard Joe Lovano say that. Jazz is a how, not a what. I definitely agree. It's important for musicians to realize that approach. Sometimes people have a hard time with jazz musicians because they think that we're snobby or that we want to make everything more complicated than it needs to be. And that could be true, but that's all because of our attitude about what it means to make music and why you make music. It's not to play the same thing over and over. It's to create something new every time. And a lot of people don't want that. They want to have something that's the same, that sounds like the record, which is totally cool, but that's not why you got into this music, or why I got into this music, was not to make the same thing over and over again, but to create new experiences. Duke Ellington wrote over 3,000 compositions in his career. Some of them played a lot, some of them played probably not very much. But even as a composer, he wanted to keep exploring. He wanted to find new ways to combine the notes together to create expressive moments, to create feelings and energy. So that's what I think jazz is. I don't think it's swing by itself. I don't think it's blues by itself. I don't think it's a particular type of band or instrumentation. It could be two people. It could be one person. It could be 100 people. It has to do with the mission of the people creating it. If those people have been seekers of information and knowledge through learning the history of the music and trying to move it forward in their own way, I think that they're in the spirit of jazz, whether you like that word or not. Many of our elders in this music didn't like that label, didn't like that word, and it stood for a lot of things. But I think whatever label you want to give it, all of those people have a strong feeling about the history and legacy of the masters and how we build off of that to create something new and an expression of each person's unique humanness. I think that's why jazz music is one of the most elevated art forms that we have because it is in the moment. It's ephemeral. It disappears. Even when you record, it doesn't have the same effect. There's lots of magical recordings, but it's more magical in person to see and experience those musicians making that sound at the same time. The energy is combining. It's a special experience you need to see live with really high level musicians who are able to do it. So I'm not sure how important the question is that we started with. What is jazz? I think it only matters when people are trying to make nuanced decisions about industry related things. It doesn't mostly have to do with the musicians themselves. Musicians who are creating what they want to create. If it's jazz, great. If it's not, great. I don't think it necessarily matters that much, but I think that attitude of discovery, seeking, building off the history, incorporating expressiveness, which oftentimes is the blues or elements of the blues, and having that swing, whether it's overt or not. I think it's a lot of things, but I think if you have that attitude, you're a jazz musician. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Glad you could hang out with me today. See you in the next video.